on, and now I just have to unmute. Am I here?
You're here. Hey, Matt.
Hiya.
I apologize for all this sun. I've been like, I feel like a vampire moving out of the sun.
That's a nice problem to have. I mean, it's pitch black here in Scotland. It's been dark for
Months.
three hours.
No, but it's probably been rainy and bad for months, right? No.
Yeah, it's been horrible. But it snowed 2 days ago, so it's really beautiful here at the moment. It's sweet and cold, but there's snow all over the mountains. Yeah.
Huh. We haven't had it quite cold enough yet to do that.
Yeah, it'll pass, I'm sure. Yeah. So how's your day going? I've been listening through since April, and then Lena were talking. I've had the headphones on as I've been walking around the house. The kids have got some friends over, so it's quite chaotic in the house outside. Hopefully nobody's gonna be running and shrieking or bleeding while we're talking, but it could happen.
That's okay if they do. Today's going well. I've been out shopping, doing a weekly shopping run to our Costco, before the crowds get in there. And I listened this morning for an hour and a half instead of reading news and doom scrolling, which I usually do in the morning, which is bad. And over the last, the last week, I've been revising my essay that I wrote this year for the Patterns Conference on should we stop writing patterns? Okay.
So when you say revising, have you changed your point of view, or are you just
no.
sharpening your argument?
Oh, no. Yes. After the patterns workshops that we have, writers workshops, you're expected to go back and make revisions. So I've been spending a few days, because it's a lull between things going on, and tightening it up. Yes, making it better. And of course, now I've got to throw it back to my shepherd, and I'm talking to another person who I really admire their opinions. She's a really good shepherd too, and co-writer with me, Lisa Havatum. And so of course I'll be doing more revisions, but yeah, the expectation is when you write something for the Patterns Conference, that's just the round one. So, yeah. And so, yes, the answer for me is I do think I need to stop writing patterns so much and focus on connecting knowledge and starting really to build communities where we can share that knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not sure, were you part of the tweet conversation with Ward? Yeah. So I'm not sure Federated Wiki.
Not with Ward, no.
I'm not sure the Federated Wiki. I was talking to my husband about this because he knows more about the inner workings of the Federated Wiki than I do. Is the right vehicle for that?
Yeah.
Because it's like authorship with attribution and then changing. And what we need is something much more messy than that. We need a forum, and we need to make strong links and have strong opinions. And anyway, that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, it's perhaps a little off topic for what Theo and Tim would like us to talk about today, but I am curious about the patterns community, because I mean, so much stuff that's influenced me as a software person seems to have come from that community of people. And I guess I have a sense that it's kind of almost like the elders of our community that are like have been and probably still are involved in that community. And I wonder whether that's part of what you're talking about, that we need to kind of do some work to make sure that community continues to thrive and sort of move on. You know, it doesn't get like left as some old artifact right? That it continues to be
well, that's any kind of knowledge in our field, and so that's why I was interested in heuristic hunting and tying things together too. I tend to think we have a very short memory, and we also believe that whoever wrote the book had, because books are physical things, and mostly software isn't, right? That you write a book, you have the final say. And I actually kind of rebel against that idea.
Yeah, I really appreciated that intervention in the conversation we were having on Twitter, where well, some people were getting kind of hung up, weren't they, about what was the gospel truth of the hexagonal,
the rule of three, and
yeah. And
Right.
you made a wonderful intervention there to say that, well, these things are just, they're fluid and no one's got ownership over them, and they're just a way of describing something at a given moment in time. And they should be
so
sharp.
Alexander, when he first wrote his, a pattern language, the 254 or 3 or whatever, in the preface, they said, these are just hypotheses. But they never really updated them, because the problem is when you're building something, it's like it takes so much work to curate something. And I think it takes a whole different energy. And if I think about patterns, about fearless change patterns, like Mary Lynn Mann's and Linda Rising have been working on those for 20 years. And they've come out with another book, second book. And they're now doing a website. And Mary Lynn is retiring from her university professorship and is going to spend more time on it. But it's a long-term kind of effort. And they would like to grow that community, because they're not the fearless change experts. They're just the curators of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's a hard, long thing to do. So.
Yeah, well, it is interesting, and I definitely appreciate the patterns that we do have. My wife's an architect, so we have that book, the Christopher Alexander book from her collection, not from mine. And I often contrast the way that building projects go with software projects, and there's differences in that, and the similarities. Like, turns out it's not just software engineers that are terrible at underestimating how long things are going to take. Or
how much they'll cost.
Right? Yeah. Everyone's an optimist. Everyone sees the happy path. Yeah.
So are we really optimists? Or
are we really optimists? Or are we just in a delusion? How easy it's going to be, maybe.
I'm not sure I'm an optimist. I'm just I don't know what I don't know. I can only go based on what I know,
Yeah. So thinking about that, right, and the uncertainty, because I mean, this is a thing I've sort of preached it enough times in training courses and talks I've given and stuff. We think about trying to encourage people to do a little bit more deliberate discovery up front, like we talk about when we do TDD or BDD. And the reasons for doing that. It takes me to thinking about these kind of tensions between how how a lot of the work that we're doing in software, if it's interesting at all to be doing, right, we're inventing something new. We're going on a voyage of discovery to somewhere that nobody's been before.
Or at least we haven't been before.
Yeah. This group of people hasn't been before. But I mean, realistically, if somebody else has already been there before, there's probably not a lot of money to be made by us just going there ourselves. Maybe we can do it in a different technology stack or something. But we are doing that sort of inventive work. And so a lot of it seems to me like a lot of the kind of terminology that we have around the way we work is very sort of sciencey and engineering-y. And actually, we don't really bring in a lot of ideas or methods from more creative arts kind of disciplines, like perhaps really putting together a software product is a lot more like putting on a play than it is building a bridge. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, the play has structure too.
Yeah. And it has a deadline.
Yeah. So it's also the case that there's a lot of room for interpretation based on who's performing the play, right? You can, do Shakespeare in the park, or you can do Shakespeare in disco, whatever. And I tend to think that when we're building products, at least when I was involved in product engineering at Tektronix, we did know what we were building, and those were a combination of hardware software products. And so we knew the limitations of the hardware, and we knew we had to build a graphics whatever workstation. There's a billion, but it was a constrained thing to do. On the other hand, when we were building something totally new, like Smalltalk, a software product, there's like, well, where do we stop? What's good enough? There was no market for that yet, really. You could just port what you got from Xerox PARC, but on our machines, it wouldn't run that way. And anyway, there were so many things that you wanted to do to make it really be an environment. And there wasn't a customer base that you could ask these things of. I mean, there weren't customers when you first started.
Why were you building it then?
Because it was cool, because it was going to be to change the world. It caught the fire imagination of managers and really smart engineers like my husband was deeply involved in. I just joined as a latecomer, but it's most of IT software though isn't necessarily that creative. I'll make a comment. If you're doing a product right now, your product is probably very constrained by what it is, right? I mean, the constraints change over time. So at some point, I think things become more like not bridge building so much, but as they're more like, and I won't say maintenance, that's not the right word, but they're constrained.
Yeah. There's still a huge amount of I'm witnessing. There's still a huge amount of creativity or variability within those constraints, though, as to how you can approach the problem and ultimately how enjoyable a model you're going to leave behind for other people to continue to add behavior to in the future, like
or your future selves.
Right. Yeah. So that step of like hunting for the sort of sweet spot in the design that feels good enough for now and feels like it will absorb the change you can see on the horizon, rather than just being satisfied with like the thing that makes the test pass. Right, that'll do. Let's move on to the next thing, and just kind of gradually accumulating cruft in the code base. I think that is a creative endeavor, right? And it requires a kind of a patience and a kind of contemplation that
it's a long-term commitment to it rather than just to the test.
Yeah, but it also requires a pace that isn't necessarily very businessy. Right, like some of my best ideas about design, some of my biggest insights about design happen when I'm nowhere near my computer, and they just happen because I'm mulling over a problem while I'm climbing a hill or something, and it just pops into my head. And I think, I don't know, I feel like there's some sort of a tension there. Well, I mean, we know, right? There's a big tension, isn't there, between the caricature of the manager kind of cracking the whip and checking what the team's velocity is this week, and that team feeling like they have permission and time to refactor their code, right? That's always a sort of ongoing tension, isn't it? our teams
Oh
doing.
yeah. Well, so I think, and I'm not trying to throw water on Scrum, but the fact that they call them sprints,
Yeah,
is a
what a
bad thing. It's like,
yeah,
I'm an ancient old jogger, right?
yeah,
and I may sprint at the end of a race to impress people, but you can't sprint all the time.
no,
And these cycles of hard work and rest and joy, I'm going to say joy in what you're doing, as
yeah,
opposed to just slogging through.
yeah,
If you don't have enough of those, and it doesn't mean that you're slacking off, but if you don't have enough of that kind of rhythm, it's just really tough.
yeah,
It's not fun.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's
and I'm, I want to say this to you before I let you come back in the conversation. When I spent those times with you at the beginning of my morning and, joining the mob, cucumber mob, it was really fun for me. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
So,
it was a special time for us because we were in a position, we were privileged that we were able to make enough money from the training and consulting work that we were doing, just about to sustain us in being able to spend that time, trying to build a software product that was going to increase the revenue of the business in a more passive way, and we could feel like we could do it at a pace that we owned rather than. We felt the commercial pressure because we all own the shares. We were all having to get on planes and go and fly off to God knows where to do a trip was to bring the cash in. So, we knew the urgency, but we also had experienced enough times working on code bases that had rotted to not want it to let get like that. And so I suppose we made an effort to enjoy the process as much as thinking about the outcome.
I just thought maybe I was lucky because I caught you at lulls in the end of the day where you had that time. So I remember as a manager at Tektronix, one of the things that I had to do in a very intense product development effort, and this was the AI machines, is that at one point I had to say, nobody gets interrupted before 10 in the morning because people tended to be early birds. They had their kids, they took them off to daycare, they came into work. People came in early. That's just the style. It's like the development team, just nobody gets interrupted before that. So they had their kind of morning, getting some energy. And I held that for maybe a month, but it was a very intense, working really hard kind of environment. And that was enough to keep people from like totally melting down.
So it's interesting though, isn't it? Because I think like we made an effort at Cucumber to enjoy we still do, to enjoy the work and enjoy each other. But I also think we were good at, and maybe you didn't get a chance to see this, but I think we were also, and we still are, I think, very good at also not putting up with bullshit. Like, being clear with each other when something's not working or when somebody's doing something that is getting on your nerves. Like being compassionate enough, I guess, to be open about stuff like that rather than kind of dancing around it. And I think, that was part of what makes that such an enjoyable team for me to work on, is that kind of people feeling safe to say what they really thought. I think it's important, but possibly off topic. But I was thinking about this thing about you were talking about. So did I hear you right? You were talking when you talk about the stuff that Alan was doing, your husband, on Smalltalk. They were doing it because it was cool. That was building Smalltalk itself. Is that what you mean? The language?
Oh yeah, exactly. Making it into a commercially viable product. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was invention, wasn't it? There. So that was pure innovation, R&D.
It was. It was first done in Tektronix laboratories on experimental hardware and a virtual machine that had to be implemented that was way too slow, right, the first time, but it demonstrated things. And then when I got involved, it was like put on a more stock hardware system, not stock, but it was one that fit into the box that actually the graphics terminal I worked on used for the same box. And then there was innovation in making it work with an operating system and, you know, all the kind of making graphics work and making the virtual machine perform well and figuring out what to fix and not and what to include. Yeah, it was just a lot of interesting stuff. So, yeah.
But it reminds me that so like you say that, you know, that was very creative work, right? Where there wasn't the commercial pressure could have harmed that creative work.
So actually in the tech labs, it was no pressure, but once it got into product development and I got involved, there was a lot of pressure getting it.
Right.
I mean, it had a time frame.
Actually gave you creative constraints almost, that it helped having a little bit of Yeah. So it's interesting knowing when it's helpful and when it's not, isn't it? Because I was thinking about recently about the contrast between, you know, I've done a lot of work in open source. I started working on Cucumber's open source in 2009. And I still do some work in open source as part of my job. And some of the work I do is more on what is now SmartBear's commercial tools. And I think part of the pace that I find like a good rhythm to work at, and a lot of my colleagues do, I think we may have picked up that pace from working in open source, where it's a little bit like when April and Lena were talking about open space. Like, people come to open source because they want to, you know, they volunteer it,
right.
They give it voluntarily, and they do it because they have enthusiasm and curiosity about the software and the problem. And I suppose that, I think there's something about that kind of work where you're working with your enthusiasm and your interest rather than, you know, because it's the next story in the backlog, that makes it more, and because there isn't a pace for you have to, you know, you've got to finish it this week or next week, that you can maybe potter away with a problem a little bit more. So it's valuable for you because you can learn, but I think it can end up being valuable for the code as well. That I suppose not all code has to last forever, does it? You know, some of the software we're building is fine if it only lasts a few years, because it's probably not filling that important a role in the world. But I'm really glad that, like, Git, for example, I believe has been pretty well engineered. I believe most of Git is built with TDD. And I'm really glad that they made the effort with that, because I want it to last, because it's a pretty significant tool in my toolbox.
Well, yeah, one wonders about, I don't think we can predict the longevity of any software that we make, but it is the case that there are certain parts of software that are just cranking it out. There is that story, there is fixing the bug, there is, you know, all that kind of stuff. And you have to, what I personally find is that I've always been better at going to new things than staying the course for many years, working after, you know, to maintain a product. And maybe that's been a privilege and a luxury. But like when I was at Tektronix, I could move from product group to product group, you know, so I didn't stay there for, you know, there were people who stayed, but I just like, what's the next new thing? So
leaving everyone else to deal with your mistakes, Rebecca, is that what it was? Walking away before it got too hot.
Well, so this is my very first real product, was a universal linking loader that could take a description of the machine, and it could combine different machine source codes, because at that time we thought that was important, and you could give it instructions about where to locate it based on the ROM or whatever it was going to go into, and it would go through and, you know, lay out the memory and relocate things according to its, the machine descriptions. And we supported like 8 machines when it first came out. And so after that was done, and I was 1 week late on that product, my product, because as I was backing up my disk, it crashed. This is when we had floppy disks. Anyway, so I spent 4 weeks writing out how it could be extended and the philosophy behind it. I had the luxury of explaining the design. And that was used for the next 5 years for 2 people that took over after I left. And it was like, yay, I could leave. So I think I am a little weird, in the fact that I liked to write about it, but I knew that I made mistakes when I did it, or there were limitations, but I kind of said what those were, and then people didn't need me anymore. That was kind of cool.
There is a huge responsibility in laying those foundations in a piece of software. Like I've been working on a greenfield project now for 9 months or so, and I think we've been going through cycles of adding features and then just thinking about the shape of it and reorganizing. Sometimes you spend a week or 2 just reorganizing the code so that it makes more sense now that you've learned about the tensions in it from what it needs to do. And there's a big responsibility in that, and I think there's a point where like it stabilizes, and now it's just the structure that you've got there is basically absorbing the new features, and I can see why that would be not as interesting for someone like you. Definitely, yeah. It's great to have that energy there at the beginning, right? When it's like having a young child having like a happy family to grow up in, right? Rather than growing up in poverty or in a dysfunctional home. Like it sets that code base out on a good path for its life, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it's also the case when and I didn't have anybody working on with me on this. It was like I didn't know what I couldn't do, right? So starting off on something new, you don't know what you can't do unless you're kind of jaded by your failures of other products. So that actually is kind of a good thing too. It's good to start new things every once in a while. So.
Yeah, well, I really recommend that. I mean, to people, anybody that, if there is anybody watching, listening to us, I think having a side project or a hobby project, something that you can do at a patient pace while you're, I think Ron Jeffries calls it the insurance mines of Ohio, doesn't it? The people just like chipping away at these user story points every week.
Well, and you may be building software, and this is, I remember, talking to people that worked with me in the consulting for Smalltalk, and they were going, oh, I'd really like to make things regular, but all the business rules are prickly and ugly, so I can't use object technology or even data to drive it in a way, because it's just a bunch of if, else, otherwise. And it's like everything I learned about, clean, refactoring things out or what, it's like, the rules aren't like that. And I'm sorry, Don. I remember Don. It's like, I'm sorry, but yeah, some things are really just messy. Sigh. It's not like we made the mess. The rules were there and they were messy. So that was for a bank, a U.S. bank. So I don't know what that says.
Well, so this is, and we've run out of time now to talk about this, but this is the big thing for me, like that COVID has shown me and hopefully more of us that some of the stuff that we were all going out to do all day, every day, which just wasn't that important, was it? I mean, my friends that are teachers have been working all the way through the pandemic because what they do is really important. My friends that are doctors have been working all the way through the pandemic because what they do is really important. But my friend who's and God bless him, who is a recruitment consultant, doesn't have a job anymore because that work has gone away. And I hope he's going to be okay. But like that is kind of what we've seen, isn't it, with this pandemic, is that some of the work that we've all been doing is not that important. And I think that really counts a lot for a lot of the software that we're getting paid to write. Like what is it really doing? Is it really all
Well,
that easy?
it's doing something, and we may not even know. And there's massive wads of it, but how well it's done may not really matter. You're absolutely right about that. Yeah. And it can't be beautiful. It just is that glue code.
Yeah. Although I really hope that like the software that controls the braking system in my car, I really hope that's beautiful. Don't you?
I do hope it is. Yeah, I absolutely do. And yeah, a lot of business transactional software probably is not. Yeah.
I think we've got to stop, haven't we? It's half past the hour. No, there's nobody come to make us.
Theo, and
So we can
kick
just
us
keep
out.
going.
Yeah.
The bell.
Ding, ding. Yeah. Okay. I could just leave. Yeah.
So I think he does want us to wind up, though. Thanks, Robert. It's been really nice catching up with you. And if we want to follow up on the patterns idea, I am keen to try and see what I could do to help with that, because it would be interesting to try and sort of.
Yeah, I think there should be more than one experiment, and I'm not sure the wiki is the only experiment, but I'm up for experimenting in a very open way. So, okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Here, end of the experiment.